I watch her in her sleep. I don't think she really knows it, though I wish she could feel my eyes gliding across her sleeping form. I see her chest heave up and down under the covers, and I see the moisture on her lips as she breathes in rhythmic harmony. I watch her in her sleep, even as the first cracks of light sneak through the window and illuminates her face. I feel myself grow excited, for I know that soon the familiar klaxon of her alarm will sound and she will look right at me. Well, not quite at me, but at the clock, though it is close enough that for a brief instant I see her gaze wash over me, and I am in bliss. As she rises out of her bed, she stretches, arching her back like a masterful gymnast, as she lets out a morning squeak. It's a sound that only she can make, and I hear it, and it brings me great joy. I know it is distorted because of my cursed confinement, and that I don't hear it in its truest form, but even the distorted sigh of an angel is still a thing of exquisite bliss. She grabs the picture on her nightstand. She looks into it, and as she does, I see her eyes start to become puffy and reddened with tears. They stream down her face in salty trails. It pains me so much to see her suffer so. To have something so beautiful and perfect know such pain and despair. How many times has she cried looking at that damn picture? How many times has she called out his name? If I could chase away her sorrow. I would open my mouth impossibly wide and gobble it all up. I watch her get dressed. Black stockings up her thighs, sliding up skin so smooth, so very smooth. Oh, how I long to caress it. I imagine the sensation to be like freshly cleaned glass, right after the muck and film has been washed of it. To feel her smooth skin under my belly, what a delight it would be for me to feel the warmth of her thighs envelop me and envelop my body in her heat. She buttons up her blouse. She puts the band in her hair, and she gives her last check in the mirror to verify the perfection that she is. Oh, how I wish she would notice me, as she used to notice me all the time. But as the months and years ebbed by, she became forgetful of me, and though I still love her so, I felt myself grow bitter and resentful at her neglect. She's gone throughout the day. I wait patiently, for it is all that I can do. The light now off in her room, and the darkness becomes my solitude. I wait, and I pace. This has become my existence, waiting for her to return to her room, the longing for her to once more bring her exhausted body into bed, so that I may once more watch her in her sleep. But the hours grow longer, and the day slips away. Normally she is back by now. Normally she returns to me. But not this night. Not this terrible night. My mind races with horrible things. Perhaps she was attacked while walking home by some vicious beast hiding in the darkness of an alley. Perhaps even now her flesh was being rended from her in sweet red strips. Perhaps in those darkest moments she remembers me. Perhaps in those final breaths she wishes she had given me more mind and cared for me as I cared for her. Does she call out my name? Did she even remember the name she once had for me, that lifetime ago, when she still loved me? Where was she? The day is now night, and the night now passes on. It becomes slow, and once more I become agitated. If only I wasn't confined. If I wasn't trapped, I could go searching for her, find a way to follow her trail, follow the sensation of warmth that emanates from her. A warmth I could never have. A warmth that one like me was incapable of producing. More hours pass. My agitation leads to anger, then desperation. What if I were to breach my confinement? What if I were to leave my prison? I know that it would be the end of me, that it was simply not to be. But this inactivity was causing me such vexation that anything would be better than this solitude. I was trapped in this nightmare of silence, save for the creaks and cracks of this old room. Then the door creaks open. I find myself ecstatic and bursting with splendid delight. I hear her voice, her sweet-sounding voice. I twirl about in my prison. How happy it is to have her home, to once more see her slide down her black stockings from her perfect legs, and see her put on a seductive strip show just for me. To see her lay in bed after a long day and be an orgasmic pleasure just seeing her happy and alive. To watch her chest heave up and down as I watch her in her sleep. Then I hear the sound. A voice much deeper than hers, and not one I have heard before. It is the sound of a man, and as he laughs, so does she, in a way that I have not heard her ever laugh before. I feel a well of pain erupting from my core. It is slow at first, but then resonates outward and overtakes my entire body. I know she has cried so much. I know she has been so lonely, but how could she be so lonely when I was right there beside her for so very long? If only she could have seen me and known. They come into the room. His advances are aggressive, his mouth already at her neck. He nibbles the soft flesh I long to taste, and as he does, she lets out a squeal, not in protest, but of invite. I can only watch in utter devastation as he forces her to the bed and begins to nibble down her blouse, undoing each button as he does. She doesn't protest. She doesn't stop it. She laughs. She giggles. And in that moment, I hate her for doing this to me. I try and turn away. I focus on some old forgotten art project on her far wall, incomplete and neglected. Neglected like me. Neglected like me. How could she do this to me? I've been there for her for so long, and this interloper just shows up out of nowhere and makes her his? Oh, how I despise him. How I despise her. In that instant, I wish I could open my mouth to insidious proportions and devour them both. I try and ignore. Blot it out. Pretend it is not happening. Pretend it doesn't exist like she does with me. Make them furniture. Make them wall decorations. Oh, how can she do this to me? How can she betray me after all the times I watched her in her sleep? Then the walls vibrate and the table begins to move. It moves, not as though jolted once, but repeatedly, a rhythmic, the thump, like some great monstrous heartbeat. I know what the sound is. I know what is happening. Don't turn around. Don't turn around. I beg myself for it to end. I lament being trapped in this prison, this nightmare. Oh, let it end. Let it end. Despite my protest, despite begging myself, I still turn. As I do, I see what I had wished had only been my delusional imagination. He was on top of her, and their naked flesh was glistening with sweat. As he thrusted, his skin rubbed up against her own beautiful, smooth flesh, and she tilted her head back in ecstasy. She was enjoying it. She was enjoying it. And as she was enthralled in love, I felt myself sinking into hatred for her. I slammed up against the glass, the impact of which caused me to become dizzy and my vision fogged due to the darkness. To my surprise, she looked over at me. She looked right at me. Did she see? Did she see? See the despair and darkness she has caused me? Finally. No, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. Instead, she looked at the picture on the table and seems to have a moment of clarity. In her eyes, she looked as though she felt a great sadness, even as that buffoon obliviously continued to undulate into her flesh. She then reached over and flipped the picture down, and once more started to moan in orgasmic bliss. On and on it went. The thrust, the moans, the thuds of her bed, and with every second I was in utter agony. It would have been more merciful if in that instant I was transported into a great desert and made to sizzle on the hot sand. Each second an eternity, each moan or grunt a rip through my soul. Then it stopped. Mercifully, it reached its climax, but then came the dreadful sound of their post-coitus breathing. I wished myself to die, to simply shrivel up and meet oblivion. I could not bear this pain. Would I have to do this every night, to see him enjoy the flesh that I wanted to fill? To see her share her divine warmth with this hairy simian that had somehow used his devil's tongue to ensnare her heart? My God, would I have to watch them in their sleep? Then he stirred and rose from her bed. She protested, she begged, but as he looked at his phone, he simply shook his head. He said he had to go. She did not understand. She could not comprehend why he could not stay in her bed. He then told her an abhorrent truth, that his wife was worried, and thus he would have to return to her side. She argued and raged, but despite her pleas, he simply said goodbye and left her alone to lament being used so. I felt sadistic glee. Good for her to agonize and writhe, to feel the same suffering that she had caused me. She had destroyed me so. Despite my love, despite my devotion, she should feel the same pain. Together we would stay in this room. Together we would share in the bitter taste of the despair. But then she cried. Once more those familiar, salty streaks came down her face, and in that instant all my animosity melted away. She grabbed the downturned picture on the table and looked into it, saying she was sorry over and over until her voice grew hoarse from her moans. I wanted to hold her, despite knowing that was impossible. I wanted to let her know that it was all right, though despite my desires to comfort her, I knew it was not meant to be, so all I could do was watch her weep. She put the picture back on the table. She smiled at it, and despite having eyes puffed with tears, she had a slight spark of joy still in them. She then laid herself down in her bed and stared at the ceiling. I was there for her, despite her not realizing it. I was feeling this moment, and in that moment, I felt our connection stronger than ever. I could forgive her for what she had done. She could torment me however she wanted, and I would always feel that warmth of love return for her. She then began to breathe heavily. Her chest bobbed up and down in a familiar pattern that I had seen every night for as long as I could remember. It was slow and quick at first. Then, like a great music box, it found its rhythm in methodic beats, until once again, I watch her in her sleep. Was this to be my existence? To always be so close to her, but never touching her? To be in the same room as her, but her never acknowledging me, at least not in the way I desired? To see her despair and want to hold her despite not having arms? To see her cry and want to wipe away her tears with hands I did not have? To fill my lips against hers, even though my lips were not anything like her own? A decision was made. This night I would be by her side. This night I would finally feel her warmth against my scaly hide. I swam in circles, gathering momentum. With each swivel of my rotation, I felt my resolve and speed increasing. Faster and faster I went, until I found myself splashing out of my glassy prison and laying on the pillow next to her. I felt the burn of the air. As I flopped about, I knew my time was almost at its end, and every precious second counted. I bounced and I flopped, and with each twist and contortion of my body, I grew ever closer to her. With each bounce, I could feel myself draw near to her warmth, and with triumph, I landed with my body against the heat of her cheek. I lay there dying, next to the love of my life. My vision grows darker now, and my gills were never meant to process the dry, dry air. I try to gasp, I try to breathe, but with every exasperated inhalation, I only find myself growing drier and drier. Despite this, it matters not. In my last moments, I can be a comfort to her, even if she doesn't realize it came from me. In these moments, I felt bliss, for I can feel my core being warmed by her soft flesh, a warmth that I could never create myself. I see the picture on the table, right next to my now empty bowl and alarm clock that will awaken her very soon. The picture is of her, and next to her is a he. He is rugged and handsome, and for the first time, familiar to me. My mind flashes with memories of the past. The plane crash, the screams of my co-pilot, the roar of the unexpected storm, and the sudden rushing of earth below. I remember lamenting my oncoming death, and begging whatever gods that could hear me to bring me back to my love, whatever the form may be. And the Chaos God answered. Sick and cruel, it heard my cries and transported me into a body that would always be near hers, but never able to communicate beyond making bubbles and eating flakes from the surface of the water. How sick and demented such a pernicious entity could be reincarnates me into this blasted body, unable to as much as caress her hair with my slimy fins. Everything begins to grow dark. I can feel the black enveloping me. In the morning, my love will awaken next to the shriveled dead corpse of her pet goldfish. She will never know that her true love had been in her room for years. Never know that he had been there for her this entire time. That even though he could not speak, he tried to envelop her with his love every moment of his sad little existence. Death reaches out to me once more. My gills are dry and stinging now. My scales start to crack and split. My bulging eyes feel like blisters as the darkness overtakes me. For even now, my love's warmth is becoming distant, and I know my end is here. I will miss her, and most of all, I will miss the times I watch her in her sleep.